panel discussion on how we can integrate product design and supply chain for a more circular economy in the drug delivery industry. We were expecting Tom Oakley here today to chair this panel, but unfortunately he has fallen ill and he didn't want anyone to catch it. So I'm replacing him here today. My name is Christine de Klerk, and I am a project leader and mechanical engineer consultant at Springboard. We have here Isabel Filipova from Owen Mumford. Then we have Klaus-Jürgen Meyer.
Yes.
It's testing my memory from Sanofi. Then we have Marco Schoenfeld, from Novartis, Julian Tremblin, if I pronounce it correctly, from TerraCycle, and Nick Hunt from Nelipak. I'm going to start off by saying that I think we all agree that there is a need to reduce the environmental impact on the drug delivery industry. But the question is, where do we currently stand? What is our benchmark? So I'd like you to open the floor by asking what is the current environmental impact of the drug delivery industry?
Thank you. Well, as we know, thank you for preempting me, we're all here because we know that every industry needs to reduce their impact, but that question of what does that mean and what does it mean for us within drug delivery and the medical industry is a huge question. There are reports out there that say that the medical industry is responsible for 4.4% of global industry emissions, but is that actually correct? There's a lot of data that's rushing around, but nothing truly defined. So I think our starting block really is to really understand how much we actually pollute and what our baseline is so that we can then start to find the best ways to move forwards and work through that.
The amount of plastic and primary packaging, as well as devices associated with the sales of Novartis products in 2019 was about 31,600 tons. The number would result in 23 million euro applying the EU tax of 800 euros per ton for non-recycled plastic. As you know, this tax is effective since 1st of January last year, but it still gets paid by the general budget of the European countries. But this might change. And don't forget the EPR fees, plastic fees that just get introduced at several countries. Coming back to the plastic footprint itself, blister packaging is the top category, the major contributor. Its amount of 18,640 tons corresponds to 59% of the Novartis plastic footprint. And it's also to highlight that the designated majority of these blisters is based on PVC and not recyclable. The number two is not catalytic packaging with about 5,000 tons only, and therefore a contribution of less than 90% to the footprint. Injectors and tailors together are number three, with about 2,500 tons, what corresponds to 7.8% to the plastic footprint. The other packaging types, as tubes, ampoules, bottles, single-dose PVC containers, and vials, contributed with less or clearly less than 500 tons. The carbon emission picture looks slightly different than the plastic footprint. However, the number one is, I think nobody is surprised, blister packaging again, with totally 81,000 tons of CO2. Alufoil foils are the major contributor to that, with 35,000 tons, followed by the aluling foils with 27,000 tons, and thermoform films with 19,000 tons. The number two, with 63,000 tons of CO2, is surprisingly the category folding boxes, followed by leaflet booklets with 35,000 tons, glass syringe barrels with 33,000 tons, and injectors with 24,000 tons. The carbon emission of the other packaging categories at Novartis per year have been clearly below 20,000 tons. So finally, that is our opinion based on the data, both the plastic carbon footprint and the plastic and the carbon footprint demonstrate that the development of sustainable blister packaging would have the greatest influence on the packaging sustainability of Novartis. However, that does not mean that the other packaging categories, but also devices, are not in the scope of sustainability.
Thank you for...
Sorry, can I just jump in on that? That's really great, and it's great to see companies setting their baseline and understanding the impact of their actual, their processes. But what we have to remember is that all of our companies are going to have different impacts because we all have different ways of manufacturing, different material uses, different distribution routes, different manufacturing locations. So it means that we all then have to be doing exactly what we've been doing here.
That leads to my next question, was like, well, how can we measure and how should we measure our environmental impact?
Yes. I can take this question. Now, I think we all agree that in the pharmaceutical industry, medical devices, medical application devices, but also the primary and secondary packaging are really key to secure the quality of our products and to do proper administration of the medicine. Nevertheless, the quantification of the environmental impact is important to identify, first of all, hotspots, and secondly, to better understand the impacts, and then in the next step, to be able to set objectives to take actions to really improve. I think that's the important part. And there, at least we from Sanofi, we're looking a lot for life cycle assessments. Life cycle assessments according to the ISO standards. This is a holistic methodology to fully understand the environmental impact of products with 16 different indicators. That's really helpful. And Sanofi is also leading this in the pharmaceutical industry, in the Pharmaceutical Environment Group. We started 18 months ago, I think, a working group on life cycle assessments, really to align the companies and really to standardize the way how to perform life cycle assessments. And also the Sustainable Markets Initiative, you may have heard about this, it was initiated 2 years ago by King Charles III, with a really holistic view on the entire medical care business. There we are also working together on a collaboration because we cannot do it alone. The important part is that we are working together with other companies, and there, I think our CEO announced it in November. You just mentioned it in your speech before, that we are working there together on a joint initiative for life cycle assessment to do this measurement.
Does that fit your experiences as well of the different
Yes.
approaches?
Yes, absolutely. Life cycle assessment is a beast. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. Those that are will know that it's a beast. As we've said, 16, 17 different impact categories. But also, when you're looking at LCA, and this is why it's so important to be defining for the industry what is the methodologies that we should be using, the way that we should be going about it in best practice, is because you have around 40 different methodologies that you could choose from, and you have a number of different data sets that you can use for the raw data for the impact of PP, for example. And it will depend upon which industry you're in, whether you're in agriculture or food production or whichever industry you're in. So there's specific ones for specific industries. So being able to define that is really important. I know that you mentioned the ISO standard, which is 14,040 and 14,044. And that is great that we've got some regulations, but it's really just you have to define your goal and scope. You have to do your interpretation and you have to do your impact assessment. And that's really all it says. I mean, there are specifics within there and there are rules that you have to abide to, but there's no specifics as to which methodology, which impact categories you need to measure. And so that's why we need to be understanding that product level impact and how we do that. But on top of that, I think we, talking earlier about business impact and our corporate footprints, we need to be looking for a methodology for that as well, because there is currently no standardized reporting or mandatory, should I say, reporting. And so companies are submitting their responsible reports or their sustainability reports, but there is no specific way to actually report it. And there is no, whilst we've set fantastic standards and targets for net zero by 2050, actually what are the steps to get to that, and what is the reality of doing that? So if we can get some industry corporate reporting standards as well, we can then start moving together to hit that really tough target.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? So I think as we look at sustainability, it's important as an industry we take the top level view, which is a planet with 10 billion people on it in 2050 that consumes less from the planet's resources in a year than the planet can regenerate. That was the start of sustainability. So when we talk about measuring the impact, ESG is actually a very good way of looking at it. The environmental piece in there, resource efficiency, resource type, the use of energy. But also from the social side, we've got to get 10 billion people living on the planet equitably and fairly in this. So we can't just drive to suck all the power into one part of the world or all the sustainable materials into another. And we have to do it in a way, and the governance piece comes in here, it's not one step of the value chain. We're all sitting here collectively trying to help healthcare be sustainable. Back to your point earlier about whether it's 4.4% or whatever. Mm-hmm. Helping healthcare be sustainable is something we have a duty of care over collectively. So whether it is packaging regulation, whether it is TCFD, whether it is how we report as companies, the governance piece is key to lining us all up so we take the friction loss out. So I think if we want to measure it, we should be mindful of the overall goal was 10 billion people, less than 1 year's worth of resource every year. And we all share that. So glad to be in it with you. It's very exciting.
If I may add just a couple of points on, we're talking about environmental measurement and environmental impact. What I was a bit shocked with, specifically working in the pharma industry more recently, so at TerraCycle we recycle things that are traditionally not recyclable. Right. And a lot of the first conversations when we enter an industry or when we look into something is, what is the percentage of things that are currently recycled versus not, right? And it's been extremely difficult from a recycling business on our side to actually even get that data. There's a lot of data that says overall, when you look at packaging, when you look at food packaging, when you look at different areas, there's a lot of data, but when it comes to specifically recyclability, designing for recycling, etc. There is company-wide reporting that tends to exist, but very little industry-wide. And it's quite, it was quite a surprise to us when we actually started to look into that space to try to understand. So some companies we spoke with, even fairly large ones, were unable to tell us the percentage of their packaging that were currently even accepted in a municipal bin, right, for recycling, which is surprising. It's almost like for a number of years it took a little bit of a back step, and I think also because of the importance there is on carbon emissions, etc., which tends to be more linked to sourcing materials or to production, there's been a lot less environmental measurement specifically when it comes to actually recyclability and recycled content.
So from an understanding of the needs and the current status, let's turn our attention to potential solutions. So if first we focus on device design, how can we see ways to reduce our environmental impact there?
Shall I take that one? So I'm a design engineer, sustainability lead in the R&D department at Owen Mumford. And design for sustainability is a little bit of a misnomer. Really, it's just design. This whole putting a tag on what it is kind of wrong, because we should just be pushing towards creating products that are better for everybody. To Nick's point, we are in the healthcare industry. We want to be making things better for everybody's health, and there is a direct link between environmental impact and human health. So if we're creating products more sustainably, then we are improving by default people's health. So from a design perspective, how can we go about creating more sustainable designs? You've got the R's, all of the R's, 3, 5, 7, however many of them along the lines of reuse, refuse, reduce, recycle, etc. So there are lots of different approaches out there that can be looked at, and it's really great to listen to a number of different companies talking about what they're doing. And please don't hate me, I'm going to pick on the material people here. So, people who produce materials are, working really hard to find bio-renewable solutions, which is great. But when we're looking at the whole picture of a device, when we're looking at designing a device, we need to look at the whole picture. We can't just change one component or how something works with a new type of material. We need to be completely changing what the solution is for the problem that the current product solves. So you've got a current product, solves a problem. How do we completely change that system so that it is therefore more sustainable. So it's about systemic change and looking totally holistically. Again, as Nick said, thinking about the people. So you may have heard of the 3 Ps, people, profit, planet, also social, environmental, and economic. So, how do we actually design for all of those things so that we are outputting a far better product solution at the end of the day? That's ultimately what we think is the right way to be going.
Do you want to? Yeah.
I will go. Let's go to packaging again. Maybe also ask a question. So at the end, we talk about sustainability, and it's great finding that everybody here, I guess, agrees it's really important to think about sustainable products. Otherwise, we might also talk about what is really sustainable. And if we go in discussion with others, everybody might have a different opinion. And you have been talking about indices up to 36 indices, and we also have to make clear we really would implement so many indices into LCA, and nobody was talking here that there might be many target conflicts. And the question would be then, what is your priority? So, and I think that here there are really many questions that are not yet answered, and where every company has to take its own decision finally. So from Vanartis, at the end, if you talk about sustainability for primary packaging, I think there is a clear strategy in place. And if you go to this exhibition, you also see many suppliers contributing to this strategy. It means for us it's really important that this might be not the same for devices, because the challenges here are different. For us, if ever feasible, we like to go in mono-like materials. We have to exclude PVC. But is one of our key goals. We have to be neutral, but it's only feasible with mono-like materials. The issue is here, if we see what can be done at the moment, there might be nice solutions available, but the solutions are not that commercially available. And there's a 2035 timeline. That means in 2005, based on the newest draft of the EU Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, pharma packaging must be recyclable. And how to deal with this? Of course, we are talking about 12 years, but it's finally nothing in our industry. And this is something that is really concerning, because it takes a lot of time to develop such materials. They might be not implemented in the next 2 years, highlighting. It takes more time, and even if then the implementation starts, it will be done stepwise for lower bioproperties, afterwards for medium bioproperties, and at the end, maybe also for high bioproperties. At the end, if you go to the current solution, if you look for the timelines for high bioproperties, something that might be similar to ACLA 4000, for example, or Triplex 180 grams per square meter. There's nothing available at the moment, because you are still starting with the simple material, for low or medium buyers. And then the question is, even if you see the timelines, they are 2030 or beyond, and a few of them are already delayed. So I think this will be an interesting journey. There might be many challenges, especially from the technical point of view, but also from the timelines, to be ready for the 2030 timeline.
Just to continue with the circularity aspect, I think that's the key driver when we are looking to the 7, 9, 10 Rs. Circularity, and to make an eco-design for circularity, to make it possible that our products are circular, because at the moment we are completely in a linear world. That's the pharma business as is. And for sure, for many quality reasons, this is okay, but we need to completely change. And the question is how can we find this way? And for sure, that's a very big question. Thinking differently is not easy, as we are used to think always in the same direction. But we try to do this, for example, with reusable devices. We try to do it with different materials. And might be that we need to think beyond this, to think in a different type of a therapy, to have another approach for therapy, instead of just applying it every day.
Yeah, and also with that, you've got the current regulations and standards that we work to. And I think that some people might hate me again, but you've got to be brave. Who's going to be the first? Who's going to be the really innovative one to actually say to the people who have set those standards decades ago, that there is a different way to do this, and it is safe, and it is absolutely the right way to be going. So I think that's another area that we can be pushing. Sorry, Julian.
No problem. No, I just wanted to add a couple of points, because we're talking here about how to design packaging or device for circularity, right? That's part of the talk. And I think, as was mentioned, the ambition is 2035. It has to be recyclable. What does it mean, etc. I think it's important to keep in mind a couple of things. One, there's not going to be a magic solution that means that tomorrow devices and primary packaging for drug delivery will be recyclable. There's not going to be a solution that tomorrow you're going to be able to put it in your yellow bin in France or recycling bin in the UK, and for it to be recyclable. That is not going to happen in the next 3 years, probably not in the next 5 years, probably not even in the next 10, right? So we have to go from that basis of understanding that there might have to be recyclability of certain packaging that will go into these bins because you're going to be able to design something monomaterial, easily recyclable, etc. But there will also be devices that will need specific programs that you're going to have to create potentially individually first, then as an industry as a second point, to try to make sure that certain things actually get collected and recycled separately. You're very likely to see certain things like blister packs, for example. They might be collected more at pharmacies because that's where people buy them and consume them and go back to get their next drug delivery. Or and that type of schemes, I think, is going to be very important if we want to tackle something today, because you're not going to be able to suddenly design your way out of, into the yellow bin, if that makes sense. But there's a couple of things that are noted in terms of when you consider what can be done today. I think the first one, and I've heard that on the show, and I've heard that in many events recently, especially in the pharma industry, everybody's talking about we're moving to monomaterial. This is the way to go. It's not going to suddenly mean that something gets recycled locally, but it at least means that the recycler who's going to take it on at some point, whether that's TerraCycle or anybody else, will actually find it easier to extract value from it, right? So you create more market for that material, right? So it could be, certain things like moving to PET rather than PVC, for example, if you're talking blister packs, but there's many, many examples of that. Or if you make a device, try to avoid the 3 or 4 different types of polymers that are hard to separate and try to move to maybe 1 or 2, right? That's very simple steps you can take today to make changes. The second thing I thought about was in our industry, in terms of, when you're recycling, say, a blister pack, or I was thinking the other day about contact lenses, because we do recycle contact lens packaging, which is very similar to blister packs as well. Think about making the closure, as efficient as possible, but at the same time as separable as possible, because the separation of the closure is usually the biggest impact and the biggest difficulty for recyclers. So, do testing with waste management companies. Do actually ask them to see, can they actually take this material? Can this closure be fairly easily separated? Because the more contamination you're going to have due to closures remaining on the, say, you have a blister pack and there's going to be, PVC and aluminum. If the aluminum is extremely hard to separate, your PVC at the end will not be as pure as it should be in order to get better markets for that, right? And I'm talking PVC, we know that the industry is also moving towards different polymers, but that remains the same question. And then the third one, I think, is it's more about industry-wide, and we know how difficult it is to compete and collaborate at the same time, but there is something to be done. And I think when you look at the variety of materials that tend to exist, and even on the show today, I was able to see a variety of different materials being proposed for different things, whether that's devices or blister packs. Try to think as an industry at some point to really think about, okay, what is the material of choice that we're all going to go towards to make sure that you don't have a multiplicity of different materials. So if you take blister packs, we collect and recycle them, but we get PVC, we get PET, we get PCTFE. So many different materials that at the end you don't get the purity of materials you want, because recycling a blister pack usually gets to a stage where you're doing something called micronization, which is really making very, very small particles of the different materials. And at the end, what you would want from this is to have one material, but currently you tend to have PVC with a mix of different other things, which reduces, again, the quality of the plastic you get at the end. So I would certainly make a call for that. And there are examples, I think we were discussing about this with a few other people on Tuesday as well, but there are industries where certain things have happened in that direction. Like the oral care industry was really interesting because Colgate came up with a HDPE tube, which was a first, which was designed for better recyclability, and they essentially gave the patent away to all the other oral care companies to say, okay, I think we fixed it, let's try to all work together. Now, there's still about 5 to 10 years before these tubes are actually collected and recycled, but that's the first step needed towards making that a more common approach. So that was it.
Nick, I think this really resonated with you, so would you care to share your thoughts?
Do you want me to talk a little bit about it through the supply chain? Cool, okay. So the first thing is we all have a shared purpose, which is helping healthcare be sustainable. I think the first part of thinking about that is it's not a value chain anymore, it's a value circle. And what Julian was just saying is really important. There's another industry after us, which is waste separation, aggregation, reprocessing, getting it back to us as feedstock. So we start thinking about it as a value circle. We start to think, okay, I want this back from him at some point. So how do I help him give it back to me in the best possible way? But as we look at that overall as a system, I think what we can say is, look, there's technological, there's economic, there's social, and there's legislative, and collectively they're what's driving our situation. And actually the technical piece, honestly, isn't that hard. It's as advanced as it needs to be right now, more or less. The economic position isn't actually that hard either. The numbers are round about right, so it's there if we want it to be. But as we sort of look forward a bit further than that, behavioural is a challenge. Quick question, UK hospitals, how long do they spend training the average care worker on sustainability? Audience participation, how much? A year? Go on, shout it out. 0, it's a little bit more than 0, but actually statistically not much. 30 minutes a year. And that includes printer cartridges and toilet paper and everything. So 30 minutes a year. So we've got, as an example, behavioural challenges where all that incredibly expensive, high-value material and engineering time and thought is turned into litter the moment they open the pack, and it's put on the floor, and nobody in that environment knows what to do with it. So it just disappears from the value chain. So where do we get our recycled feedstock from to make the products more sustainable? Behavioural. And the second piece I wanted to pick up on top of what everybody said, which I think is really on point, is around legislative. So the legislation has come from lots of different places over time, and it's evolved in its own little silos. So, for example, the HPRC just did a study and found that the definition of hospital waste is different in every country in Europe. So it's all separated differently, if it's separated at all. And actually, most of it ends up in mixed waste, which makes it very hard to use. Hospital legislation. That's where our products are being used or at home. Right. Packaging legislation, 11607, is written before or doesn't really envisage advanced recycling. Makes it very hard to use recycled materials in medical and pharmaceutical packaging. Third piece of legislation, state legislation about the percentage of recycle, which I think you mentioned. So there's a drive to get 30% or more recycled material into products, but they all conflict with each other. So the opportunity and the space to meet all three of those pieces of legislation is really very small. So the thing I'd like to bring out on top is a suggestion that we start looking for the easy entry points. Where can we bring recycled material or monomaterials or change the chemistry? Where can we get that implemented? Because as we do that, we create the demand, we build the economic case, we solve the technical problems, and then we start to create the opportunity for people to be better trained because there's now a way of making this more circular. And to match your stat, if healthcare was a country, it would be the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter in Europe. So we've got a huge purpose for doing this. Plastic is essential in the devices. You can't administer these drugs another way. So it's an essential part of the situation. And at the moment, it's going into mixed waste, so it's fundamentally contributing to the issue of sustainability. The more we can make it separable, the more we can get recycle in there, the more we help healthcare be sustainable.
Okay. So before we wrap up then, let's cast a view on the future. And I'd like to ask each of you, what do you think the future will hold for the sustainability in the drug delivery industry?
Well, I just hope that it's not going to be called sustainability. I hope that it's just going to be the status quo. But it's about innovation, and I think that maybe one of the streams you might have picked up on today is collaboration. We are all from different areas of the healthcare industry, and we have talked, and we all understand that there's a massive collaboration needed between our different aspects of industry, and there are many more stakeholders who will be sitting in this room who can see that collaboration is key to getting to where we need to get to. So we need to open the doors, we need to pull down those walls, and we need to talk, and we need to be frank about it. And that's what I hope to see.
I just would like to echo collaboration is really key. On the one hand side, we cannot do it on our own. That's, I think, already expressed. Secondly, from the regulator's perspective, we are asked to work together. For sure, on the one hand side, we are competitors on the market, the pharmaceutical companies. But regarding use phase and end of life, we are asked to work together. And so looking forward really to great collaborations and to find joint solutions in terms of how we measure the impact and to improve. And yes, to see it then as the normal.
So I will not jump on the collaboration, even this is really very, very important also for Novartis. But finally, let me also say, it gets a long journey, and without the framework, without the pressure on our industry, I think we wouldn't see that many innovative projects. I think this is about innovation we're talking now, and it takes time to implement innovation, and I'm sure that we will improve our footprint and the system in itself significantly in the future.
So I've got a few thoughts actually on top of what you said, and obviously specifically talking about waste and waste reduction, etc. There's a couple of things that I thought about. The first one was I'm struck a little bit by the fact that sustainability is becoming a massive topic here. Clearly, the room is full. But the industry is still a little bit sheltered from the general scrutiny. I think that, say, the food industry or the CPG companies in other sectors have been under. I think thanks to exemptions from regulations or certain things that drug delivery is a very specific business and it requires specific regulation. But we have to expect that as certain other sectors are, cleaning up their act to some extent, the scrutiny will become higher and stronger, specifically within the pharma industry. So I think we all have to expect that within the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to really ramp up massively. The second thing I thought about was one of the big obstacles we were talking about was regulation, right? Regulation prevents certain things, right? Or there's a certain conservatism within the pharma industry that goes towards, and I'm saying pharma, but the health industry in general. You go into a hospital, there's a yellow bin for medical waste, for example, I'm going to say an example in the UK, and then you open the bin and you literally see every single waste that comes from that hospital is in that bin, right? Because the hospital is like, I'm worried that I'm putting something I shouldn't somewhere else, so I'm going to put everything to incineration. And I think that's going to require change, and it's going to require change through two aspects. One was behavioral, as you mentioned, and I think the second one is I hear a lot of, well, regulators prevent us from doing this, right? I think what we're going to see in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, is that if you go to regulators with a solution that you've already planned, prepared, etc., you're going to get a good ear from the regulator. And we are seeing that we're starting to work with some partners on declassifying certain waste streams so that instead of being considered non-recyclable and medical waste, they can actually be taken out of the medical waste and be recycled. Yeah. So it's really important to think about that, like be on the forefront. And I think the most ambitious players within that field will see devices that 2 years ago people would have said, no chance, we'll never recycle this, to actually make meaningful steps towards recycling those.
Yeah. Cool. Well, they said all the clever stuff. So, transformation. I'll do something different. Transformation. Took 200 years of industrialization to get us where we are. If you believe all the science, we've got about 23 years to get back, or to get somewhere else. We won't get there by salami slicing little things. That's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. So I think sustainability is a very significant change, and I think it calls for all of us to start looking at doing things differently. So to share, and I know for a fact, some of the larger medical device companies have said they are going to go toe-to-toe with the FDA about the way regulations are written, because in order to hit their sustainability commitments towards net zero healthcare or low carbon healthcare, they cannot do it with the environment that they're currently in. And I think we all have a part to play in that, as you said. It's about creating solutions that work and taking them out and saying, we need these implementing now. How do we make the regulations, or how do we make the environment work around those? We wrote the damn rules in the first place. They can be unwritten and changed. And I think that's the opportunity that we have.
Thank you so much to all our incredible speakers for this very interesting discussion. I think we have about 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. I'm just looking where the microphone is.
You get to ask the first question.
Okay, hi, thank you so much for your contributions. I wanted to ask how affordable sustainability is. Is sustainability a luxury, or will our efforts on sustainability deprive people from access to care? How equitable actually is sustainability? I'm Hugo Verheunen from Lisbon, and working on developing a novel biomaterial. This being said, sorry for being so provocative.
I'd love to jump in straight off on that one. So if we were to get closing remarks, it would have been, ask yourselves, what does sustainability mean to you? And what is sustainability? And I think that there's a lot of people in big pharma, in the healthcare sector in general, who, you know, you've got the people lower down the echelons who are understanding sustainability and are wanting to drive it, but then you've got C-suite who aren't necessarily getting it, and they see it as something that's going to cost them money. It's going to be really expensive to become more sustainable. Well, actually, if we innovate massively and we change the way we do what we do and we transform, then you're also transforming your business models. So it's not just transformation of the products and the processes, it's transformation of the businesses that sell the services or the solutions. So therefore you become, it is financially viable. So sustainability should not be more expensive, it should be better. Anybody else?
I'd love to add a couple of points on this. It's a very interesting situation we're in because over the last 40 odd years, we've reduced the cost of every single thing, right? Packaging specifically you've gone through lightweighting, reduction of use of materials, which is lovely and it's important for sustainability. But you get to a stage where you've squeezed that cost so much that now we are starting to think that's actually created an issue. There's no value left in that packaging. It's going to be really hard to recycle, suddenly you need to do a lot of things. But I wanted to take one step further even and think about, your question is very relevant as we talk about recycling, but we also want to talk about reuse, right? There's a big question for the pharma industry, for others, as to how do we go there. And it's really interesting that the first hurdle that you hear on reuse is always the same thing. It's like, but it's costing too much. And the reason it's costing too much is when you're doing a reuse pilot, you're saying, I'm going to do 10,000 packages that are reusable, and on the side I'm making 30 million packages that are disposable. And obviously that disposable package is extremely cheaper than the reusable package. But if you ended up in a very step change scenario in which the vast majority of your packages were reusable, that cost would shrink as well. So I think we've got into this full sense of we've gone almost too far in terms of lightweighting and reducing costs, that now we're thinking that anything else is going to cost too much money. I think it won't. I think it just requires big change, as you mentioned, Isabel.
Just two comments from my side. The first one, I just want to remind you on the Tesla story, the first 10 years without any profit. That's for many innovations the case. Secondly, we all have the vision that it will be not only sustainable, but it will also be from a financial perspective sustainable. And that's also one of the goals of the Sustainable Markets Initiatives, also to improve the healthcare and not only to reduce the carbon footprint. Reducing carbon footprint is not enough. That's pretty clear.
With regards to Tesla, just be aware where the lithium is mined. So maybe not that much sustainable, at least for the ones that are mining. So the other provocative thought I have is, I'm trained as an MD, and you mentioned how much exposure or training we have in sustainability. So actually in my training we had 0. The issue is how can you implement such training as undergrad student and whilst training in order not to happen the following. So you go to the OR and then the surgeon doesn't know what to do with the scalpel, but he knows where to put the liter. So this goes kind of as a balance. Should I provide medical training, life-saving, or sustainability, and how actually you are able to guide people or nudge people to be aware of this.
I agree. It is a challenge and one that the healthcare professionals are facing up to. Where I think, and it applies to us all as well, where I think it's relevant, where governments have set net zero targets like the UK and written it into law, that automatically cascades down into the healthcare providers that are funded by the government. And that is already cascading down into our world in terms of the footprint of products, the recyclability of products, and that's the way they're driving that is through RFQs, and there are minimum requirements in the RFQs around sustainability, and that goes two ways. One is making sure that what goes into those facilities progressively becomes more sustainable, and the other one is so that the 1 million employees in the UK who work in the NHS, they are also bound to reduce the footprint of the healthcare provision because there are targets set for those hospitals. So I think it's happening, and I think it's a very good way of driving behavioural change through a whole industry, right the way back up through the value chain. But I do definitely agree, the way hospitals are educated needs to change.
Can I add in from a design perspective? As you're starting to design new solutions to problems, you need to be building those processes in. So when you're designing a product solution, you're not just designing the scalpel to cut the skin. You're designing how the whole system works and how the doctor or the nurse interacts with that piece of product so that it then does fit within the circular economy. So, and that design leads to behaviour change.
There are a few more questions, so please raise your hand again here.
Hello, thank you for the discussion. Caroline Calmes from Saint-Gobain Bioprocess Solutions. I have two questions, one for Novartis, because of the sound, and I didn't catch all the figures you provide at the beginning. Can you repeat where it comes from or the source? And the second is for Isobel from Owen Mumford. You mentioned LCA and how to set the standard for the industry. I would like to have your point of view. According to you, who could be the best stakeholder organization, association or company that could lead this big project? Thank you.
So let me start maybe even without microphone. So if you talk about Novartis data, we're talking about internal investigations and internal reports that has been made by Novartis Technical Operations. But basically, if somebody is interested, I would be able to share the slides for you. I did already one time. That means the data are already public.
So on the LCA side, Klaus from Sanofi has already talked about setting up, you've been working on it for 18 months, a group within the pharma industry to start setting the LCA. I'm not yet part of that, and it won't take long. But I think that, I could say, well, we want to spearhead it because I know that the way that we're doing LCA is like a really good way to go. But as I also mentioned, there are 40 different ways that methods that you can use. So that's where it then comes down to that collaboration to be able to talk to different companies, understand what their drivers are, what is important for them, how they've specified which impact categories are the most important. So it's such a huge question. It needs to be collaborative. It needs to be a consortium of different companies from across the industry coming together to make sure that we are all aligned and that we all understand what the end goal is.
Hi, thanks. I'm from BD, and I just have a question for all of you and for the global health system. Are we really ready and mature enough to just collaborate all together with this sustainable objective? And it's for us, we really want to jump in, but we are like looking to each other and always waiting to see if the other are ready also. So just to know on your point, are you ready? Do you want to collaborate? Or maybe in 5 years, because we need to be more stable or more supported by all the legislative, or I don't know?
I'm happy to start with that one. So I joined the medical industry 2 years ago and have a background in sustainability and design. And well, if you're in the sustainability industry, you are inherently collaborative because it's all about helping each other get to our mutual end goal. So to come into the medical industry and basically be told to has been a real challenge. So hopefully I've not let anything slip today. But from our perspective, we are way beyond ready to be talking about what we think is the right way to be going, to be collaborating to find solutions. Because, you know, we've got, what, 26, 7, how many years it is to hit those targets. And so if we don't move today, we're not going to get there. And that's, so yeah, from my perspective, way beyond ready.
Let me add something to that. The message to go back to your leadership is, I can save you money by being collaborative. It always works. So, Nelipak, we touch hundreds of companies further down the value chain and have conversations, the same conversations with every single one. Everybody has the same corporate net zero goals. Everyone. And they're really ambitious, to the extent that people inside the companies are looking up at the higher-ups going, why did you commit to that? But they've committed, and they've committed to the shareholders, and it's baked into the value in the balance sheets now. So the commitment's been made. All the companies, there's 3 or 4 philosophies to get to net zero. So if you take 100 companies, you're really in 4 groups of 25. Okay? Right. So everybody's employing people or changing organizational structures or giving people sustainability as an addition on their job title, which is lovely. So they're spending the money, and what they're also doing by not collaborating is creating massive friction loss. So the chance of them hitting their corporate goals and the chance is going to be either much more expensive or much less likely. So collaboration is the way that the friction loss gets taken away and everybody gets to the same net zero goal. So in a way, it's net neutral on competitivity because everybody set the same goal. And I think that's why now is absolutely too late to start collaborating. But it's already happening. And you see this an awful lot. There are a lot of conversations across different groups now. So what I would say is just do it. And if people are scared about doing it, do it scared. It's fine. Because it's not an exam with an answer that's written down. It's an exam where we're working out the answers as we go. And we'll get them wrong some of the time. I certainly have. But let's get going now.
I think it's a very interesting question. We work across a dozen industries, give or take. You're not worse than the others. You're not better either, to be entirely honest. But you're not worse, right? Which is a good starting point, right? And I hear a lot. The main concern that I hear is usually around, oh well, we can't in pharma because competition laws, and we can't in pharma because of this and because of that. This is mostly conservatism in its wrong approach, right? It's no, we shouldn't do things like we've always done them. But there's another thing I wanted to share, which is if breakthroughs tend to happen because somebody somewhere went further ahead than the others as well. So competition can be in that too. And I think you can be in a space where for a year or two, one of the actors will take something on, right? So let's say somebody will try to solve blister pack collection and recycling, or another one will really go ahead and start collecting 30% of their device. If you do that, and then you're open that after you've had that competitive advantage for, say, a year or two, you're really open to then say, okay, I think we've solved it. Let's go around the table and say, how do we do it as an industry? Then that's how you're going to see change as well. So I don't think, if today you're having a conversation with somebody else and they say, oh, I'm not really ready to collaborate on this project, still do the project. And then 2 years on, when it's successful, do it. And if it's not successful, then somebody else will have done a project that is. And at that point, have that conversation with them to see how you can get together. I have one example that comes to mind, which was in the blister pack collection and recycling space. We've run a program in the UK with Superdrug, which is obviously a pharmacy group. somehow. And this program was sponsored by one brand and started by one brand. And then about 12 months in, it's now become a collaborative exercise across the industry. Other brands have actually started to pitch in some money to make it bigger. We're now reaching about 15% of what is sold in terms of blister packs within these stores, which is, not negligible when you're thinking about something that's about 2 years old. So again, don't hesitate to really go there, and then collaboration tends to sometimes happen as a second step too.
Just to add this, thanks for the flowers for the pharma industry. And yes, it was Sanofi starting the blister pack recycling, and therefore it was a great success that it is now possible to do it in the UK with Supertrack. Maybe, I don't know if you heard the speech of José Vallejo. He was talking about the PSCI initiative. I think it's more than 70 companies working already together. So it's possible, yes. From my perspective, it seems to be most difficult to really work together with our direct competitors, as we are on the same markets with similar products. But especially with our suppliers, I don't see any major challenge. That should be possible, and even we will find opportunities with our colleagues from Novartis, Roche, Novo, and so on.
It's clear we can keep talking, and I think that was the whole intention, to start this conversation, but we're running out of time, unfortunately. Thank you very much to our panel, and thank you very much for all your contributions from the audience as well.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.